In early 2010, a lot of gamers thought Capcom had now lost their magic. This was a studio that gave us survival horrors, defined fighting games, and built arcade culture in the 90s. By 2013, fans were really frustrated. Sales began to get shaky, reviews were mixed, and online people kept asking the same question: has Capcom lost its identity? However, what happened next might be the greatest comeback story in all of modern gaming history. The trouble for Capcom didn't just come about overnight. In 2012, Capcom released Resident Evil 6, which initially sold really well, but didn't do very well critically. Fans felt it had drifted too far away from the horror which Resident Evil was known for, and into an over-the-top action game. The game was more about explosions and set pieces and Michael Bay energy, rather than the fear that Resident Evil was known for. For the franchise that invented survival horror with Resident Evil, this felt like a major betrayal for longtime fans, and that wasn't the only issue. Capcom was heavily criticised for their aggressive DLC practices. On-disc DLC controversies really hurt the trust. Some projects were outsourced to Western studios, which came back with a lot of mixed results. Between 2012 and 2016, the reputation of the company slowly began to erode. They weren't failing, but they also weren't respected, and in gaming, reputation really matters. So, instead of doubling down on the action, Capcom did something pretty unexpected. They went smaller and riskier and more focused, and in 2017 they released Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. This game was different. It was a first-person perspective, claustrophobic house setting, limited ammo, and actual tension. It was a deliberate return to real horror, and it really worked. Critics praised it, fans felt heard, and the franchise actually felt scary again. But this wasn't just some lucky hit, it was the start of a new strategy for Capcom. Capcom didn't stop at that one game though. In 2018, Monster Hunter's World launched globally. Now previously Monster Hunters had been a massive hit in Japan but kind of a niche in the West. But Monster Hunter World really changed that. They streamlined mechanics, added more modern visuals, and also added online accessibility. And it became Capcom's best-selling game ever. And then came the remakes. In 2019 we got the remake of Resident Evil 2, which released to massive critical acclaim. And this wasn't just a nostalgia play, it was a full reinvention. In that same year we got Devil May Cry 5, which proved that Capcom hadn't lost its action game mastery either. Within 2 years, they had went from the most doubted in the industry to the most dominant in the industry. So what actually changed and how did Capcom get back on track? So you can really boil it down to 3 things. So firstly, they had a strong in-house tech. So the Resident Evil engine allowed for faster development and more consistent quality. Secondly, they focused on their core identity. They stopped chasing the trends and leaned into what they actually did best. And lastly, and more importantly, they listened to the fans. They returned to the survival horror roots instead of ignoring all the criticism. Capcom didn't really reinvent themselves, it was more of a rediscovery. Today, Capcom is one of the most consistent publishers in gaming. They're critically strong, commercially very successful, and they're also well respected again. And that's pretty rare, because most companies don't tend to recover after losing fans' trust. But Capcom did. And that's why this might be one of the greatest comeback stories in all of gaming history.